Sahih işlerim, hani işleri. Ay işlerim şurok. Arete işlerim, mukurepin işleri işlerim. İşlerin eskoder eştikaram. İşleri tuşk eset işlerim borun. Ki başladı. Ki aman şaram. Niko karate genişledim insan. Şarata demiş. Sıkıntı şaram. Sabete moštara nemokora netijere šarana skaritas. Ihtiyar mukuruma neštera. Saw some delicious smoke flying through. Hold on. Kadera mukoka. It was a good reminder. Если шроса катедра писали штаратска. Era mutarete karane sharinish krok. Yara musarane sharit elamotata eftene horatak. Kie saram samurishani amofarane kienemishti datak. Kiate moroniaseanash near moyati hafiniarets niro hinianiakshne. Dorgam sniadorkanianian tinch. Gayarni Yorani Kiri de Orasumandi Yashorasak Kamburasani Kenyan Nayaramokoni Seneca Kenimshanialik Kisora Samrasati Rashamurania first here. Kayarni Eran Yastoreteshtetternek. Kan ayak Erik Mundi Erik Mukti. Kia hani sho ne nishara ne tikramokr kene kumasun. Fiam soranan kia kanishte aratakatishte. There's so much to learn about YouTube. Sayum yoru sharemo korate teretian so ishetikatinka. Achne sor shetakatis shayern tietranatset. Simur samurnek leo karanek netiani mufte araknikot. Ki sharemashtat beani arakini somek. Сахалкоршкт аркемионифтилиум сур ятикнимештиен так хахникм соне. Ним со шататрат скеним шторак Uparatete shtete katete metete ane kare kare shte masorate kete shte kare uparani shte reteshke kidrish kidrete bokura kini mishara mokode mishte afte petesh to borone ne kaktemete aka kitarne stero pokode aka ni mishte henreshter pokode tetashta upahani kanishte peshtere takada kene miata klete kene mishkede yeni mi FTP ştöre pekarete ştöre tare ştöre tare karmis ştöre kade yeni ştöre kani ştöre ni yeni taram kafte trişte karo karate teştek ikal kani ştöre mustufti ştöre ke oro kane kene ştöre mukata kane ştöre şkoro kani yani kade fu parane kadini mi ani sto karate ne mukoni ste Akili anestera kunederishtayanak. Furtidane aranakadishta kromakade kiederishtaratete ye lifted kadaram kadederishkadareki. Kiedere mandasare mukudene mishtarat. Kim Kim Anika Nisham. Seki nishara moko ni sa ni karate kareshta darushta de motöfte pekati trishta tilmakani kedem. Irte peroshta moko ni trishta de arate kemio de sa. Makar de katerika nimlefti eroshta kurani. Ni esere pukurumete trateneshte. Gotta say, Bulgarian babas, I'm not very familiar with Asian hair. Stamo da carete della solo I was tempted to wear a hat, but I guess that's not on the cards. Sanya shada kuka sharites kamporte kse. Fumadin di shamboroneste katamu korone kiteste nakato. Seni boromani kaniste. Uparneste tarakanishtorok. Kianem if the bormatestin the anyman. Anyman so. Van sarete tartaka iste. Uporomane andostora tekjete mislost, ne vakatini. Kumbor tetresat eftepetenen de kalarist. Stambani testet eftemonakanitist. Sikanyeni iste motakalere kanitenek. Mani anistere petafte otokorate kierish katenits. Sat jaromod endiste niketefte alkanki nekeliste enimist. Van baret erkinimis dormada kadetisk. I didn't know that my solar plexus had bones to become disjointed. But dang. Should I admit this person? Somebody calling themselves Zoom user is trying to enter the waiting room, or is entered the waiting room, and I'm trying to understand whether to let them in or not. No. Yes, no. Admit. Yes. Okay. Oh, I'm just like clearing something in my well, I'm clearing something in my solar plexus. And I can message them. Who are you, Zoom user? Why would you use Zoom? Why would you do that to yourself? feel like Zoom is like MySpace, where it's just like terrible looking software, but they got real big due to probably like a combination of good business to business marketing and pandemic and a lot of different stuff. And I think when pandemic dropped, like they weren't encrypted or like the encryption didn't work or something. So a bunch of people got into some very big meetings and some stuff went wrong. Well, if this person can't answer my message, then I wouldn't call them a Zoom user. And also they're not coming in. Okay. Am I ready? Am I ready? Okay, let's start. Oh, oh, it's hotter. Oh, I don't know if it was hotter, but hotter's here now. Oh no, Zoom user's back. Hey, Zoom user, who is this? We didn't order no pizza, man. But you're in now, Hoda. So should I let this person in? I don't know who this person is. I don't want them to come in like screaming Nazi propaganda. I don't know how they would have to. If anyone's going to be screaming Nazi propaganda, it's going to be us. Oh gosh. All right, so that's not gonna happen. So this is all recorded. So Zoom user can see it on YouTube if they want to, if they use YouTube. Welcome to the first, I'm gonna say public container of why am I like this. I don't know if y'all pay attention to like the strange things I do with punctuation and emoji, but I thought it was a major thing that I moved the apostrophe after the question mark, and B, I changed the emoji from a diamond emoji to a red sun or a red circle. C, I moved the apostrophe to the outside of the red sun. And I would say that like in many circles, I've said that the apostrophe is a prayer. And when I put the emoji, which represents a terma, in this case, the energy of occasion or setting sun, inside the prayer, I would say it relates to having internalized the parts of myself, which were using those terma. And what does that mean? Well, I've talked about this container as being a container where I channel a soul complex, as I refer to, or I have referred to or called red star, green cloud. If y'all are familiar with classical astrology or the law of Kemet or the law of Hyperborea, I'll say that the red star represents Hathor or Venus. Zoom is trying to enter again. Who's also known as the morning star and the evening star. Different times of year, different roles. I would say that, well, I will say that in my natal chart, there is like a close conjunction between Venus and Mars. And what I've been told by classical astrologers is that when that conjunction was happening and Venus was an evening star, they would say that that star embodied a goddess of war, which is very different to, I feel like, I won't say the classical significations of Venus, but I would say the mainstream or the common day associations with Venus as a goddess of love. And I think I'll say in combination with that that the polarization of male bodies and female bodies and the energies which are said to inhabit, or the spirits that are said to embody male bodies and female bodies, are very polarized. And I feel like this is a distortion. If you're familiar with my work, then you'll know that I tend to refer to energies as being combinations of yin and yang. And I would say also in common time, partially due to the work of a Taoist sage who was called Lao Tzu, there are still male-bodied and female-bodied distortions relating to yin and yang. But I think it's also fair to say that in most cultures, like the vast majority of cultures on Earth today, yang has sort of like drifted towards being more commonly embodied with intention by male bodies, and yin has sort of drifted to being more commonly embodied with awareness by female bodies. And I feel like this is also a distortion, and it's something that's not very true of my ancestral lineages within my lifetime. It's like this. So I've said in a few different places that the way I define yang is as like the setting of containment or the setting of context. So if I ask you a question like, hey Pod, what kind of car do you drive? If you pay attention to the energy in your body, it's changed by my question. You don't have to answer it. You can answer it or not. It looks like a nice car. But that I would say is yin, right? So by the asking of that question, I've set a context. And then because I've changed the context of this container, which I might define one day, yin sort of feels that context. Like in common speech, you might say like, I start thinking about whether I answer that question. Or you might start thinking about like, you know, do I name like the model of the car, the make of the car, the year of the car, the color of the car, etc. And that's all like an application of yin. And then you could say like inside your head, those thoughts, I'm not just talking about Podrock, but those thoughts are kind of emanations of yin, which change the containment of the awareness of your upper chakras, right? So now awareness is filling in and being conditioned by those thoughts. So again, like yang is like setting of context, and then yin is like the filling or the awareness of the context. And I feel like when you look at yin and yang in that way, and you look at it in the way that I've been talking about just now, it's pretty like ludicrous to think that anybody could just be yang or anybody could just be yin. Or that only male bodies could do yang, or only female bodies could do yin, because, you know, women can ask questions, men can ask questions, men can make statements, women can make statements, men can listen sometimes. I'm not gonna go there. I'd say that like in our matrix of consensual reality, women perhaps have to spend more time listening. But I feel like these distortions of terms like yin and yang end up conditioning us towards those habits, I'll say, unconscious behaviors. Does anybody have any questions about that? Feel like you can unmute, maybe? Let me see. Yes, you're all allowed to unmute yourselves according to Zoom, which, as I've said before, has an unpredictable user interface according to me. But if you don't have any questions in audio or video, you can make questions in text.
like I said, I'm going to record all of this, but I think I'm going to chop it up, which is why I said I have a lot to learn about YouTube, because I feel like some people might watch long videos, some people might get super blazed and watch videos and let them come on and sleep through them and then wake up with very strange recollections of dreams. I think like the autoplay function in YouTube has led to a lot of demonic possession. This has also been attested to by a couple of people I've worked with. But I'd say that it feels aligned for me to make shorter videos. I'll probably cut out the drivel that's coming out of my mouth right now and make it a little snappier for people with shorter attention spans. But since nobody has any questions, I'm gonna go to the Why Am I Like This channel. And I'm gonna look at some of the questions I've put there. And I'm going to intuitively choose. Oh gosh. What is terma and what is way? I'm just gonna put answered. So the question is, what is terma and what is way? Why is this the first question? Okay. So I guess like first of all, I started saying that this is a container where I channel a soul complex known as red star green cloud. I talked about red star as the Venus Mars conjunction. What I didn't talk about is green cloud. And what I'll say now is that the green cloud represents to me an energy which I feel like would most likely be well anchored to the star named Polaris. I'm muted. I came back muted. That was very interesting. Are we going to talk about like interference? Maybe not. Where did I cut off for y'all?
The star Polaris.
Oh, oh. This has happened to me a lot. And it's happened to a lot of us in Minnesota. It's happened to us often in the calls in the broom, I'll say. Is this what Magnus meant when he said he was gonna liquidate me? Dang. Well, as far as I can tell, my vessel still possesses the same soul complex, which I was talking about at some length as red star green cloud. So the green cloud refers to Polaris, which is an aspect of a star that I know as Sirius C, which to me represents the energy of Levantara, which is a conglomeration of energies like Hanuman, Latu, Green Tara, Alkida, and is sort of attested to by the Dogon people of Mali, but is the source of a great amount of controversy amongst astronomers. The funny thing is, the first time I said this, it cut out just as I said that stars and astronomical bodies or astral bodies have a habit of being found for us when our consciousness is ready for them. Which, you know, you might argue that means that the Dogon people were ready for the belief in a star named Sirius C. And that Western astronomy is not. Or you could say that the matrix of consensual reality that some people just call the matrix, or some people just call reality, is not ready to feel like there's actually a star called Sirius C. Some people have talked about the existence of Sirius C through the observation of Sirius A and B, and a sense that their movement is perturbed by the influence of a highly gravitational object, which they don't have any evidence of. My guides call it Sirius C. And just like our bodies have many different cells, you could say that my soul is part of a cell, which is part of the body of Sirius C. So that's one of the things I say about this container. Another thing I've said about this container is that anything that I transmit in this container is guaranteed not to result in the accumulation or the reification or the creation of more karma, and is guaranteed to resolve at least some karma. And the third thing I'll say about this container, which I've said before, is that if anybody feels like I have said something, done something, undone something, whatever it is, which results in the creation of more karma, then I welcome you to tell me about it. I welcome you to talk about it on the internet. You can say that Nobu is a bad person. So the question of what is terma and what is way. So I would say that in current time, what people refer to terma is the existence of spirits that have been placed in objects in the land. So there are some traditions, I feel like many of y'all have probably heard of a rock that split in Japan, which was said to be the home of a bad spirit, or, you know, many bad spirits. I feel like speaking of spirit as like one or many is kind of the same thing, at least from my perspective, the perspective of my lineages. And people were kind of afraid that like these bad spirits were going to get out and do all the things that the people who put these spirits in that rock didn't want the spirits to do. And I feel like mostly like the reception of this news was sort of like reverent of the tradition of putting spirits in objects. And I feel like probably like many of us have felt like we're doing that maybe intuitively or have had dreams about it. I would say like if you're tuning in to this container or if you end up watching this recording on YouTube, that may very well be the case. I would say also in current time, but not in common time, there is an understanding that the tradition of terma comes from lineages which are known as like Bon lineages or Buddhist lineages in current time. And this refers very much to the same thing. However, I've caught some shit in the past for talking about terma from some people who I find very dear, who are also like, you know, very well read in Buddhism in ways that I'm not. And the contention has been that terma only refers to spirits embodying physical objects. And at the time, what I said is that whenever I'm sharing space with that person, I'm happy to use the term astral terma when I refer to terma, which does not embody physical objects. But earlier on in this session, I was talking about moving or changing like the diamond-shaped emoji to a red sun. And I think I might have said that for me, that they are what I would call astral terma. And the reason I call them astral terma is because I would say that anything that relates to the energies of the upper dantian, or what my lineages call the upper sea, is astral energy. So anything that we can see is astral energy. Anything that we can make seen is a manipulation of astral energy. And the same goes for like thoughts and stuff like that. And you know, I think that like maybe some people might say like, oh, like why do they call it astral energy? I think people tend to talk about astral energy as relating to dream work or imaginal work. And I think they are talking about astral energy, but I don't think people often talk about astral energy in the context of things that we can type, like emoji, or things that we can draw, like sigils or talismans. And one of the reasons I would refer to as astral energy is because it is stuff that we can see because the light of the sun is bouncing off things that make it look different. And so it literally comes from a star, which is where the word astral comes from. I think another reason I'll call it astral energy is because that the layer of what some people might call like the field, or some people might call it God, or the isness that produces energy at that frequency range relates to what we know as stars in our consensus reality, right? Like in the way that we perceive reality and make meaning of space and time. So to go back to what I was saying about the red circle emoji and the diamond emoji, like they're astral term because they relate to symbols, which relate to thoughts, and also because they can be seen. And then the terma part of it is, for me, gesturing at the fact that, like all sigils, they're essentially portals. So every time you see a McDonald's symbol, something comes up in your awareness. And I would say for most of us, our awareness is like mostly up here. Like very few people actually like spread awareness into the rest of their bodies. So when you see the McDonald's logo, maybe something comes up in your awareness and it relates to experiences you've had with McDonald's. Maybe you've seen advertisements relating to McDonald's. Perhaps you've had um, the privilege of going to McDonald's one or more times. And I would say that all of the impressions that you form in the upper chakras of your energy body are recorded in a vast canvas of astral energy. So every time you see that logo, those memories are going to come up. And I would say also that depending on how open, like the crown chakra, the throat chakra, and the third eye are, you're likely going to tune into aspects of astral energy which are non-local to your body. So let's say like every time like Vision goes to McDonald's, he forms impressions relating to the McDonald's logo. And then say like when Hoda drives past McDonald's, since I would say like Hoda is like very perceptive, then the impressions that Vision left in the astral every time he went to McDonald's may start to flow into Hoda's upper chakras. And then they may be conditioned in those upper chakras and then come through what I call Indra Kala, or what, from my perspective, my lineage is called Indra Kala, which is the pearl of time. And then Hoda may be able to tune into some of Vision's impressions of McDonald's, but Hoda might also tune into some of everybody else's impressions of McDonald's, and that includes people who just see the logo on TV, see advertisements, etc. So I feel like that maybe covers the way in which a symbol can be a portal, and that the way in which those portals can point towards locations in this canvas, which I'm calling astral energy, and then also how all of those impressions are going to be alike in some ways and different in other ways. And you could say that when they're alike, they end up being locatable more easily, because sort of similar to how like dirt gets carried through a stream and ends up being deposited in places. You could say that if everybody ends up with the same sense impressions, which end up in the upper chakras, then dirt's going to start accumulating in a certain place. And then the more that dirt accumulates, the larger of a mound it's going to make. And you could also say that that mound has more gravity, or perceptual gravity. So let's say if like two people have different, I'm definitely not trying to get endorsed by McDonald's, but if two people have different impressions of McDonald's, then if they're opposed, you could say that like almost no impression net, like outside of time, is left in the astral. But if two people have the same impression, where they're like, okay, like I just smashed the large fries and it tasted a certain way, then that's going to leave like a larger bump in the astral. And yeah, like if two people smash a large fries, but one of them thinks it's too salty and one of them thinks it's not that salty, you might end up with a double peak. And I would call that accumulation of karma a terma. Does anybody have any questions about that yet? Or disagreements? Please disagree. How appropriate for somebody named Earth Tech to think of the actual Earth nouns and the grids around the world. I'm so glad you brought that in. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if y'all have had this impression, but when I'm driving around and I see mountains, sometimes I feel like the gods of those mountains are calling to me. And sometimes I call back to them. And I would say also that the gods of those mountains are karmic accumulations of people's impressions of those mountains. Not just people's, but we're talking about people right now. We're talking about people astral, which I would say is like in a different filing cabinet to like cat astral. I'd say cats have access to many astral cabinets. It's part of why I love cats. Just a part. So the next thing I'll kind of talk about in relation to terma, and I will talk about way eventually, which is like the new thing. Oh, thank you, Vision. This is gonna be interesting to edit. It's probably gonna be like really dumb. But so Vision asked very astutely, according to my gnosis, how does this process work the other Dantian? First of all, I'm trying to popularize calling them the seeds. But Dantian is probably going to be like much more sticky for people because they're already terma associated with Dantian, right? Like people talk about them, people talk about C and they're not talking about Dantian. So you could say that like the astral terma relating to referring to Dantian as C's is like relatively small, whereas the astral terma relating to Dantians as elixir pools or weird things that Asian doctors talk about is pretty big. But yeah, I was about to say something like that. So earlier I was saying that like most people are not necessarily able to like direct awareness into their bodies. And then I would say like even fewer people are able to allow awareness to go into and stay in their lower bodies. And I would say that that's because of the presence of karmic accumulation, again, which relates to usually like trauma and conditioning, and or the cords which come in and feed upon the disharmonized energy of trauma. Those karmic accumulations, yeah. But yeah, you could say that those accumulations end up compartmentalizing our energy body. So it's very hard for awareness, which you can like think of as a fluid for this metaphor, to like move through these compartments and get into all the parts of our body. And I'd say that like healing at some level is about resolving those compartments, resolving the walls between the compartments so that all of our compartments, or what I call like soul fragments or spirit fragments, can become like one spirit again. Dang, like Earth just dropping bangers right now. So yeah, so very few people I would say can direct awareness fully into the other Dantian, to go back to your question, because and then very few people can actually like allow awareness to like just occupy the other Dantian. But I would say that for people who can direct their awareness into the middle Dantian or the middle C and the lower Dantian and the lower C, then the impressions which are formed in the upper C ends up say like causing, or like I'll say I'll use Earth Tech's analogy, right? Like blowing into these other seeds. And that breath, you could say, can move clearly through the other dantians, but usually it's going to disturb the water in those seeds. And then that water is going to get pushed up against karmic accumulations. And then it's going to create waves. Are y'all familiar with how waves are created from tidal movements and rocks on the bottom of the ocean? Or the way the tectonic plates will like suddenly change, and then you'll have like a lot of water accumulating up here and then another lot of water down here. So then this water wants to come here because water always wants to find an equilibrium, like a level which connects them. And then because that water is moving here, then this comes up. And then because this water is up here, then this comes up, and then you end up with like a wall of water coming. And then like you see these like videos on YouTube where like people at the beach and like all these beach umbrellas go flying, right? And I'd say like that tends to happen well, I mean, it can happen up here as well if we have trauma or conditioning, which creates karmic accumulation up here. It can happen in our middle seas, and it can happen in our lower dantian. And what I would say there is that often when that happens, it dysregulates our nervous system. You can say that like our nervous system is regulated when the water is like pretty still, like maybe a little wavy. And something I like to say is that like when the water is still, you can see the reflection of the sky, and you can see all the way through to the bottom. Even when it's wavy, you can kind of see like through to the bottom. Maybe you don't really see a clean reflection of the sky. And I feel like this speaks to a lot of like what I would call dirty gnosis, of which my gnosis may be classified as dirty, if you want it to be. But then when the nervous system becomes like choppy enough, I would say that at that point, the energy of that system becomes too frenetic for us to stay, or for our awareness to stay in those parts of our body. And then we usually get like triggered, and those triggers tend to either make us like black out, get angry, get sad. And then I would say most commonly when people talk about triggers, they're talking about these like moments of like eruption. But I would say that you know, what a lot of people call an internal monologue is actually something that arises from being triggered. So like, you know, like if water is still, you're fine. If water's like this, like maybe you're still fine. You can hold awareness there. But if it gets like this, then I would say like our body has become very good at accumulating behavioral patterns and thought forms and connections to thought forms that send us back into the brain. So to touch back to Vision's question, I'll say that, you know, what happens, what's the effect on, what is the effect of this process on the other dantian? And I would say that mostly we continue to give energy to these sigils, right? So to go back to the example of McDonald's, like maybe you start thinking about McDonald's, and then your awareness starts to go down to your middle dantian, and it's like, okay, I remember something bad happening to me at McDonald's. You get sent back up into their head. And then those thought forms, those patterns of thought that occur because of that bad thing happening at McDonald's, then also start to accumulate towards that terma. And then I would say often that like sometimes we go to McDonald's and it's like so fucking good. We're like, rah, rah, rah, rah, rah. It's like, ugh. And that can also dysregulate us, right? Like I think often people talk about being triggered by things that they don't like, but at least like from my perspective, of the perspective of my lineages, you can also be triggered into dysregulation by something that you like so much, right? Like kind of pull on the thread of this like a lot longer, but I think y'all get the idea. Like some people talk about like bliss, or, you know, like if you've ever been to like a dance music event and like shit's fucking pumping and like there's all these beautiful people around and like you're on drugs maybe, I don't know. Then you get dysregulated so much that you also can start to accumulate attachments to dance music or drugs or attractive people. And again, the same thing happens. You go to McDonald's, you eat fries, you're like, oh my God, these fries are the best. And then like you get sent back into your head, and all of these positive thought forms start to accumulate with this terma. And then the same thing kind of applies to the lower dantian. I would say that when we are able to bring awareness down into the middle dantian, not so, I'll just talk about the middle dantian for now, without dysregulating the surface of that water, then the vibrations that result from touching our impressions of a large fries or McChicken or whatever can then be transmitted to the field, or like the layer of the field, which the middle dantian relates to energetically. I would say that the lower dantian is mostly local. And when I say local, I don't mean like only inside the lower dantian, but I would say that it's limited by space. Earth Tech's asking sound, and I'm like, yes. But in some East Asian folk medicine or martial arts lineages, they talk about cultivating the lower dantian in order to cultivate what they call encounter chi. And I would say that, like, when it comes to the emanations of the energy that sits in a cultivated lower dantian, then the level of integrity of the body or the vessel which has that energy ends up dictating how far that shield can be perceived. So it's like local, but it's not necessarily just limited to the lower dantian or the physical body, which is why people see auras like out here. And then, yeah, you could say that, like, there's an organization called the Heart Math Institute, which has done some really interesting work with measuring heart rate variability for one, but also like the effect and like communication between the electromagnetic fields of the heart. And I would say that that relates, I have to let Earth Tech back in. That relates mostly to what I would call like the frequency level of the lower dantian, even if like it's coming from the physical organ known as the heart. And I don't really want to get into like physical organs versus metaphysical organs right now, but we have a few minutes left and I want to talk about way. So, just going back quickly to terma, I'll say that terma accumulates all the time based on our impressions, mostly in the upper chakras when it comes to astral terma. So in that sense, like, everybody can co-create terma. But when I talk about creating terma or closing terma, welcome back, I'll say that again, like, just like the intensity and the reach of the lower dantian is proportional in a non-linear way to the integrity of the vessel, the same applies to the middle dantian and the upper dantian. So you could kind of imagine that somebody who is like a very integrated energy body, so they've integrated all their parts, they've like reduced the amount of compartmentalization in their metaphysical body and their physical body, get into that later maybe, then they have the power to create larger impressions than people just sort of casually giving awareness with their upper chakra energy. So perhaps you could say, like, instead of just adding like layers of silt to a mountain, you could maybe blow up the mountain, or you can accumulate silt from a lot of different parts of like the astral canvas and then create your own accumulations. And that's what I believe it means to create terma, close terma. I would say that transmitting terma is a slightly different thing, but I think it follows more or less the same principles. And then I would say, like, way, first of all, it's just like a word that I channeled, and it's spelled W-E-I. And I don't really know all of the reasons yet, but maybe we'll talk about them now. But I would first say that it's like a subcategory of terma. And then secondly, I'll say that while terma tend to be like closed in time, and the reason that, terma tend to be closed like this is so that when people think about, say, the Tao Te Ching, there's only a limited amount to which the way they think about it can actually change the Tao Te Ching, right? Like, maybe their awareness can accumulate on the outskirts of the terma of the Tao Te Ching, but then there is like a core of the Tao Te Ching which remains very locked down. You could say that like if a lot and a lot and a lot of people end up thinking about the Tao Te Ching, then like maybe they could crack the core and it could change in some fundamental way. But my understanding of the terma of Tao Te Ching is that, of course, distortions accumulate around it. Like everybody translates it. One of my favorite translations is the Ursula Le Guin translation. She says, at some point, I thought that the Tao Te Ching had more translations than it had readers. And I think that's true. Like it's a very old book with many, many different translations in many different languages. And each of those have their own terma. And you could say that in some ways they're situated around the terma of the core of the Tao Te Ching, but they aren't necessarily like breaching the core of it. So that when people reincarnate to work with the Tao Te Ching, they may be called to dismember the Tao Te Ching, which means to kind of change the accumulations around it. So that, for instance, somebody's saying that yang is related to the baby's penis, which creates like this masculine association with yang energy. Somebody can come along and then dismember that and then renew the way that other people who have access to the astral, and then other people who just read things that people sometimes channel out of the astral may form new impressions of what the terma of yin and yang actually mean. And yeah, I would say like wei is a subcategory of terma which relates to a kind of like constant process of dismemberment. So in the past, in more contained containers, I would say that I've spoken of wei as like nexus points. And what that means is that when I transmit wei to people, they can take it in a way which could be said to be like read only, right? So like they can receive energies from a wei, but they can't give energies back to it. But then there is a way of transmitting wei where I can offer it to somebody so that their energies, when it's appropriate for their field, can go back into the terma and update that terma. And that also like their experiences can also be used to like clean up that terma. So in that sense, like if I offer a wei to Padrak or Pada, everybody in this container, and I say some of y'all can, I'd say like all of y'all can write to it, and then only some people can read from it. And I would say everybody can read from it. And I'm very curious what y'all make of like what I'm doing right now. But what I would say then is that as energies from that terma make it into your field, and again, like this is all offered, like it's not like pushed upon your fields at all, then the way that it lands in the astral material of your upper sea creates some kind of geometry which can be fed back to that wei, and which makes that wei sort of auto-dismembering in the sense that it's not just going to be attestation or the upper chakra impressions of the person who created it, but it's also going to have access to the impressions that y'all have when those energies sort of reverberate from your field. And that makes, from my perspective, the wei much more robust, because I would say that instead of being like one accumulation, which is very big and pointy, which relates to one person's impressions, and then everybody having impressions of that, it becomes like many, many different peaks, which correspond in certain ways. So then when somebody also reads from this terma, they're not just getting that one person's, like one originating person's impressions, but they're also getting offered to them Podrock's impressions or Hoda's impression. And then that's also going to create different reverberations in their astral material, which means they're less likely to just say like, yang is the baby's penis, and they're more likely to end up with a more differentiated and flexible understanding of that term. And then also that terma is going to give different energies and different astral impressions to the upper chakras in different contexts. So you could say like maybe they recognize when they could be using these energies in contexts which are not necessarily recognizable based on the original impressions that form that way, or formerly known as terma. And it becomes less likely to accumulate so much attention that it takes attention from everybody else in an unconscious way, like Buddhism. So does that make sense? I felt like I was kind of rushing through it, but hopefully thank you for the reflections. Yeah, I know it only answers one question. I thought I was going to talk about why am I like this? It's called Why Am I Like This? But I definitely want to be respectful to y'all's time. Like I said, I'll record it. I'll do some stuff with some kind of video editor, and I'll upload it to the 000 space. If you're not in 000, then I may ask you if you want to be in 000, and you can say no, fuck off. I might send you the video anyway. But I would love to discuss it with you in the channel called Why Am I Like This in 000, or anywhere you feel called to discuss it with me. And yeah, thank y'all for helping me to hold this portal. And I look forward to the next one. Peace.